Here's a couple of notes for AWS candidates in particular that I noticed made sense talking to people applying for such jobs. The first thing I believe it's worthwhile mentioning is to make a clear difference between customer obsession and customer focus. The reason why I'm saying this is because it's a very common scenario that candidates come from a lesser known company that often doesn't have such high standards when it comes to working and dealing with customers. So for example, if you get the question, tell me about time when you had to work with a difficult customer, you might be inclined to say, hey, a scenario where something crashed on your end and your customer was difficult on you. When in fact, this is not necessarily going to talk about your customer obsession, but rather your customer support, right? So probably a better example would be a time when maybe your customer wanted too many things and you started to negotiate with the customer to arrive to a compromise to eventually, satisfy their needs with the highest possible quality, and of course, if possible, also within the given constraints, costs, time, whatever that was. So long story short, customer obsession is really about raising the bar in many cases, so you should keep this in mind while answering those behavioral questions. The second very important piece of advice here is, of course, there's a ton of behavioral questions, usually, especially during these on-site interviews, as well as, the phone interviews. And there's, of course, the leadership principles that they take quite seriously, but there's nothing that matters more than a great story that you have. And in order for you to have a great story, you must understand the question that they ask you. So when you get asked a question, listen to learn, don't listen just to respond. Or a better way to put this, start with why. Why are they asking you this question? So in my previous example, a time when you had to deal with a difficult customer, they ask you this because they want to show your customer obsession, right? Like, where is your standard? What's your standard level? How do you think about these things? In a similar way, a time when you had to deal with difficult feedback from your manager, they would ask you this because they want to see your interpersonal skills and your ability to regain their trust, right? So long as you understand why they ask you the question in the first place, it will be so much easier for you to give a great answer. And these are the this is how you should think about the behavioral interview. It's not about coming up with an answer, but having the best possible answer. And the best possible answers often mean that you must read the room or understand why they ask you these questions. Another note here is about rejection reasons. My experience has shown that many people feel discouraged because of the fact they don't receive a rejection reason. However, while then talking to people at other companies and even at Amazon, those rejection reasons are something you really don't actually want to hear because they are so biased and so expeditive that they won't give you any interesting benefits. So take a rejection reason as something you're not interested in. Like, a rejection reason is why you think you didn't do well in the job, about self-assessing your own performance for that particular role. Probably also worthwhile mentioning is the interviewing process is generally designed at these high-performing companies to see whether you're the best fit for the job. Like, including if you might be overqualified for the job. And overqualified is often a rejection reason for telephone screening rounds. It's often people that prepare or over-prepare for these telephone screening rounds. And the examples that they give are not the ones of the candidate that they are looking for that specific role. But it's very important to understand that these people are helpful in the interviewing process. Well, maybe except the bar wizard where they're pushing you a little bit, but they are helpful. They are trying to help you to understand, and you should help them as well to understand on whether you are the right type of person for that specific job. So if you're trying to sugarcoat or to duck a couple of questions, it's rarely to your advantage, right? So this whole thing about behavioral interviewing, you must learn how to trick it and so on and so forth, that's not as efficient as you might think. And this brings me to the next point, making up stories during these interviews. In my experience, it's, I think, maybe 2% or 3% of the people that I spoke with that I see capable of lying effectively in a job interview. So another way to put it is that I can bet with a high degree of confidence that whenever you're lying, whenever you're making up a story, I can easily read you that you're talking about this. And if I don't read you from the initial story that you're telling me, I could also get another chance to read you in the follow-up questions, right? And there's also a side effect that if you're trying to duck the question, try to duck the follow-up questions, you will not score high for those leadership principles. So it won't be an amazing answer. So the maximum you could do here is to give a so-so answer after all. So long story short, I don't think it's an efficient strategy. I don't think it's an efficient strategy to make things up, especially for a behavioral interview. Like for the technical, okay, maybe, yeah, there is more, the technical stuff, but behaviors are something that they are supposed to read you on. So not being sincere in my opinion, is too dangerous of a business. And last but not least, a few pointers on how great candidates are actually qualified for these types of jobs. And I learned by time that the most interesting candidates are also the candidates from which I was able to learn from. Needless to say, it has to be an enjoyable experience that you have with that specific person during the interviewing process or the mock interviews or whatever. But usually the best performers, you can always learn something from them. It's always an enriching experience, and I've learned this also sometimes the hard way, that the people that you don't learn anything from are basically something is not going in the right direction here. So if you have interesting stories or interesting events from which you think could benefit, could add value to the quality of your interview, I would very much encourage you to do so, to consider telling them. The other very important aspect is you must send a positive energy. Okay, even if you're not a funny person, you don't make great jokes, okay, but still you can send your positivity throughout the interview, because it's also a qualifier for someone that has a great potential in these situations. And usually, you can tell whether if a person is someone special for a job interview. And you would be surprised, how many people have incredible CVs, come from incredible employers, and when you talk to them for a couple of minutes, you realize that actually, it's not as good as you thought it would be. So I would very much encourage you to not just try to set the bar to fit into the process of behavioral interviewing, but try to excel, try to go beyond your comfort zone, and try to answer these questions in a way that you believe makes the best sense, whatever you qualify that, because this is one of the best predictors of a successful candidate in my experience.